everything fits in. And he gave me a technique for learning how to see how it fits in. Please welcome Bob Hyman.
Okay. I hope that everybody is anticipating that they're going to have a dynamic experience, because you are. So start anticipating, because it's going to happen. And I'm going to begin simply by saying to all of you that SAIOE is about you. It's about you as an individual. And as an individual, you are the power and the beauty and the love in every aspect of what is going to go on today. So I'm going to start with the fact that everybody here has something in common. And the thing that we all have in common is that we're all one of a kind. We're all unique. In fact, we are so unique that we actually live in our own dimension of time and space. Now that, by the way, was Albert Einstein who said it, that we actually, every single individual on the planet, the several billion souls that live on the planet, every one of them lives in their own time and their own space. They have their own reality. In addition to that, there's a lot going on that can't be explained. And the power of being able to tap into the unexplained is truly unimaginable. There have been cases now where people, there was a particular young lady, she was about 14 years old, and she was hypnotized and taken way back. And she started to speak fluent French with an accent, as if she had been brought up and raised and spoke French all her life. But when she came back to, it was understood that she had never been exposed to French, had never spoken French, and in fact couldn't possibly have ever even been around it or experienced, because there was no relationship. So you begin to say, how could that happen? How could a man like Mozart get angry when people said, how do you compose such beautiful music? And he said, I don't compose it, I hear it. And when I hear it, I write it down. He would hear over and over music that no one had ever heard before, and he would write it down. Now, yes, he had skills. He had the skill to be able to hear and write the music. And so SAIOE began to come together for me, Greg had tapped on, when I basically came down with the kiss of death, which is stomach cancer. And slightly before that, I had serious bone deterioration. I was actually told that I wouldn't ever walk again without back surgery, and my knees went and everything went, and then after that, I came down with cancer. And when it was diagnosed, you know, you all probably heard this before, that there is one thing a lot more dangerous than cancer, and that's the word itself. And when you hear something like that, you become part of the energy of that. So what I decided was that this has been going on for a while, and I began to question it. And I thought, wow, how is it that I was this pretty darn good athlete and always super healthy and never had a problem physically, mentally alert, everything was fine in my life, and what happened? Why did my bones start to disintegrate, a third of my mass? Why did all this stuff start to occur? And then I came down with cancer. And I remember after I had surgery and I had a third of my stomach removed, and I didn't take any chemo, and I was pretty much resolved to the fact that I was going to die. And that was a powerful place to be, because for the first time in my life, I actually felt that was okay. It was okay because I was not in a condition that I was used to being in or that I could be in. A lot has changed since then. And I'm going to pull this out for effect, but that's okay. I carry this around with me, and I have a little tag in it. And the tag says Stephen Hawkins on it. Anybody not know who Stephen Hawkins is? Okay, well, that's good. Glad of that. Well, Stephen Hawkins is arguably the most brilliant man that ever walked the planet, okay? Certainly on a par with Einstein. And if you've ever seen or listened or pictured that this is a man that can't walk around, that can't even speak without voice assistance and amplification, that's completely contorted and almost unable to function. And yet he is given the recognition and the security. He knows who he is. And he discovered at a very early age that what he had, what his gift was his mind. And so the reason I want to bring this up is because we all have a tendency, and there's a little bit of this in the manual too that you're going to read about, we all have a tendency to live our lives outside of our true energy of who we are. We live our lives by, I wish I had done this yesterday. I wish I had started doing this a while back. I wish I had met this person. I wish I had gone to this school. I wish I had gone to school at all. I wanted to become this, and I didn't. And they live in that energy. And then they also live in the energy of tomorrow. It's like, what's going to happen to me tomorrow? What am I going to do tomorrow? And so what happens is they're lost. Well, this was written about over almost 100 years ago. And you've got the man that wrote it right in that manual over 100 years ago. And there have been a few books written, and a few people have gotten pretty wealthy on something that was said, profoundly said, almost 100 years ago, and probably said 1,000 years ago. And that is that we are designed to live in the moment. Now, here's why we're designed to live in the moment, and here's how. There can be no question about that. Because think about this. We're all sitting here now, and are we telling our stomachs how to digest food? Are we telling our heart how to adjust its heartbeat? Are we telling our body how to keep its blood pressure at a certain level, to keep its body temperature at a certain level, and all the hormonal functions and all the activities and everything that goes on in your body is being done without conscious thought? Oh my God. Think about that. We're all here left to be in the moment. And most of us aren't, me included. SAIOE is the gift of knowing because it's a tool that works. And in order to understand how SAIOE works, I'm going to give you some really good information here. First of all, there isn't anything that you can do well and think about it when you're doing it, okay? I don't know how many times I should say that, maybe 3 times. There isn't anything that you can do well and think about it while you're doing it, okay? You can ask a great violinist or a great pianist, or you can a great trumpet player or a great athlete, and they're all going to tell you the same thing. They perfect the skill, and then after they've perfected the skill and they don't have to think about it anymore, that's when they enter that portal of magnificence. That's when they become great. In other words, when a child learning the multiplication tables, he better learn them without thought. He better learn that 8 times 9 is 72, not that 8 times 9 is 64 and you add 8 to it to get 72. Not any thought at all. Just memorize it. And then when you know it and you don't have to think about it, then you can effectively use it. This symposium is the secrets of love. So I'm going to give you a little bit of example of how SAIOE can assist you in your life. Now, we have a lot more guys in this audience than we normally have. Usually it seems to be the females that are mostly here. So one thing that I've done in the past, for those of you that have been to SAIOEs, is I give you a little bit of an example of the power of SAIOE. SAIOE is a system of thought that allows you to become more in touch with your inner knowledge. And your inner knowledge is a knowledge that is very mysterious. We don't really actually know, other than it seems to be all-encompassing and omnipresent. And basically, in order to achieve the ability, in order to have the ability of tapping into this inner knowledge, in order to get there, whether it's about love, or about friendship, or about business, or about health, in order to get there, you have to stop thinking about it. And that's one of the secrets. So let me give you an example of how powerful SAIOE is. SAIOE is, a lot of you gals are married and happily married. A lot of you are in a relationship and happy with the relationship. And a lot of you are looking perhaps for a relationship. Some of you might be married and looking for a relationship. I'm doing this for the gals, but the guys can, because it's hard to do it for both at once, it loses something. But for the guys, it's exactly the same thing, okay? For the gals, how would you like to meet a mate? And that mate had a sense of you, appreciated you, was inspired by you, and was open to who you were, your thoughts, and everything about you. And a person who knew and felt your essence. How'd you like to meet that person? Please note that I didn't talk about a beautiful mansion or a Mercedes-Benz or a racehorse or a Ferrari or anything, or a successful business. Think about how powerful the energy of that is. And everything blossoms from thoughts. Einstein at Princeton, when he was talking to some young students, said to them, "What is the greatest force on the planet?" And they all raised their hand. Of course they knew what that was: hydrogen energy, nuclear energy. And when Einstein smiled and shook his head, and then they said, hydraulics, what is it? And he said, well, in a physical world, and we live in a physical world, in a physical world, you measure the power, or how much power something has, by how much it takes to stop it. So, you hear that saying that, what happens when an unstoppable force meets an irresistible object? What about the energy that comes from an atom? What about the energy that comes from the physical? So all physical is energy. And when Einstein wrote his formula, E equals mc squared, and nobody was getting it, or a lot of people weren't, and finally he just started to say to reporters, well, basically it just shows that the physical and energy are one and the same. So we are energy. And energy is the power. So he asked his class at Princeton, what's the greatest force on the planet? And the greatest force is a thought. Because a thought is unstoppable. You cannot stop a thought. You can lock somebody in a cage. You can do anything. You can't stop a thought. And so the greatest force is that which can't be stopped in the physical world, which is a thought. So that's where the power is. What SAIOE does is it allows you to get a sense of this, have appreciation for it, and be inspired by it, and be open to it, and give you the and so you can feel the essence of it. Energy. Energy. We're gonna have fun a little bit later doing something that turned out from the last SAIOE to be the most popular thing, and that is we get into circles, and we have coaches, and we have a coach of sense of, Miriam, a coach of appreciation, Jane, a coach of inspiration, and we've done a little switch on inspiration. We actually took inspiration and we moved it. And we now have openness and inspiration switched with two of the smartest men, among the smartest men, I didn't say women now, two of the smartest men that I know, which is Asher Milgram and Gary Schwartz. These are truly two incredibly brilliant men, and they are going to do inspiration and openness in the circles. Now, inspiration is the fuel of life, and don't ever think it's different. It's the only fuel, okay? Now, we have a systemic system, so we need food, and we need sleep to allow our brain to balance out and settle. Unless you're a shark. You know that a shark doesn't sleep? I think there might be some human sharks that don't sleep either. So, inspiration is the fuel, okay? Inspiration is the fuel. And we're taught other things. It's important to have good food, it's important to have natural food. But inspiration is the fuel. There were people in concentration camps that had nothing but bread and water. And not only survived, but some of them are in their 90s and in their hundreds that are still alive today. I'm not discounting the value of good food. I'm pointing out to you that the real fuel is inspiration. So, and that is one of the toughest ones of all. How do you get inspiration? And inspiration is very close to love. Inspiration, love. Inspiration is the energy that comes up. I'm going to end this by, I'm going to tap into love and tell you one of the stories that basically stays with me very strongly. Is I remember my mother, first of all, my mom, who died recently, I guess about a year ago now, was 95 years old. And my mother got everything she wanted, and she never asked for anything. Can you handle that one? Okay. My dad basically was a workaholic, and probably an alcoholic too. He did it all. He used to come home at night totally exhausted, held a newspaper up and started reading his newspaper, and then he would fall asleep on the couch. But he was there. He was there. And there was security in the energy of him being there. It didn't matter. He was there. So that's inspiring. My mom also tells a story, and this is kind of an insight on the secrets of love, okay? My mom tells a story about her father, my grandfather, who died just before I was born. And she said, and Mom was one of 10 children. And she said every single child in the family thought that they were his favorite. And I was thinking, wow. And then she said, and every kid in the neighborhood thought they were his favorite. So love is kind of an inspirational process. In other words, just like there's no end to how much love is in you, because that's where it is. Where does love begin? Right here, right in the heart. No accident that we have a cardiologist here. It starts right in the heart. That's where it begins. And there's no limit to it. You can just keep bringing it up. Just keep bringing it up. You always have it there. And that's inspiration, very close, kind of a little bit of a tie-in there. How about openness? Can you imagine being on this planet and not being open? Look at a child. They're inspired and they're open. They're just like sponges and they're all excited. And now we begin our journey and we're children. And what are we told? Stop running around and stop running around, right? Sit still. Pay attention. Eat what you're supposed to eat. What about my feelings, Mom? What about my feelings, Dad? Don't talk to me about feelings. Just behave yourself. I remember when I was in school, and I had may not be that way anymore, but I remember I had to go to the bathroom. I had to urinate, and I raised my hand, and I wasn't called. And I raised my hand again, and I wasn't called. And it was hurting me, and I was strained, and I raised my hand again. And finally, and it was torture. I'm sitting there being tortured. I remember one time I had to take a bowel movement so badly that when I was running to the bathroom, I was about 7 or 8 years old, I'm running to the bathroom, and I couldn't make it. So I pooped in my underwear. And then when I came home with no underwear on, my mom said, "Where's your underwear?" And I said, "I don't know." My underwear and the poop went in the garbage. I didn't tell her that, though. These are the things that are important. Is basically it's the present. It's the immediate time. Imagine if you came to school and your teacher just jumped up and down with excitement and said, "I am so happy you're here," and basically got all excited and said, "We're going to do whatever subject it is, and I want you all to contribute. I want your imagination. I want you to be part of this process." But we not only don't do it, we're taught not to do that. Now we have to learn the ABCs, and we have to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, and all that's important. But Einstein himself said that aptitude and IQ are not measurable. My goodness. Aptitude and IQ are not measurable. Well, what is intelligence if you can't measure it? And Einstein said, imagination, of course. And think about it. There isn't anything on the planet, whether it's a bridge or a road or a building or a painting or a composition, that doesn't come from what? Imagination. So that's intelligence. And Einstein said something else when they said, "Well, isn't it important for a child to learn to read by the time they're 5 or 6? And he said, "Why? What's the difference whether they learn to read at 5, 6, or 12? What matters is that they love to read." Little difference. Okay, we're going to move along. SAIOE is, you're probably getting it, you looked in the manual, SAIOE, that's an acronym. S stands for sense of, A stands for appreciation, I inspiration, O for openness, and E for essence. The power comes from just making that part of your DNA, so that everything that you do in life, basically, that process occurs. Just like you don't tell your heart to beat, you don't tell your stomach to digest food, you don't tell yourself to SAIOE. It just happens. And remember what I said, you can't do anything without thought unless you've mastered it. The good thing is that when we're born, we have mastered heartbeat, we have mastered blood pressure, we've mastered all those things, and we come in with that knowledge. We don't have to think about it. It's at the highest state. That knowledge is infinite knowledge. That's God. That's the universe. That's Mother Nature basically giving you that knowledge. And now what do you do with it? You stay in the moment, and you get a sense of life. You have appreciation for it. You're inspired by it, and you're open to it. I am going to introduce now one of my favorite people in the world, Mimi Guarneri, Dr. Guarneri, and I am not going to tell you a whole lot about her because it's all in that little manual that you have. There's a whole lot of information about her. But what I am going to tell you is this is a woman that knew SAIOE and didn't know the word, but when I got to know her, I knew that this is a woman that truly has a sense of life, has appreciation, has inspiration, is inspired and is open, and feels the essence of life. And she has a partner that she's worked with at Scripps for 25 years. And Scripps, many of you heard of Scripps. Scripps is not like any other medical facility. What she has done is taken, this is a woman who's performed maybe 1,000 heart surgeries, angioplasty, heart transplant, you name it. She's done it all, but she's now at a different place. She's at a higher place now. There are plenty of people that can still do that and have to do it, and it's needed. But she's now in a place where she wants people not to need that and to have the information, to kind of get a sense of their life and and listen to their life. So Mimi Guarneri at Scripps set up a holistic program, and that's not easy in Western medicine. And she set up a holistic program and combined it with allopathic medicine. In other words, you go there and boy, you're going to be treated like a human being, not like a robot or a machine. And I can tell you personally, because when I did SAIOE last year, okay, and I'm 73, and she was listening to my heart with a stethoscope, and she said, "Come on in, I want to do an examination on you." What? And she did. And she told me that she was concerned about my high blood pressure. I said, "What?" I came in I thought you were going to check my heart. She said, "I'm concerned about your high blood pressure first." And she said, "I'm not concerned about your heart, but," she said, "there's something going on that we need to keep an eye on." Now, I'm not going to go into it because I had been to heart specialists before, and every time I went, they scared the shit out of me and told me I had a heart murmur and told me about this. But I did remember that when I was in high school, and I played basketball and football, and I was track, and I was playing all these sports, that it was my senior year, and I was going in, and they had Dr. Stein, who was a World War II veteran medical doctor, an older guy, and I came in, and he checked my heart, and he handed me a note, and he said, "You're not going to be able to play football." And I've been playing football since I was a kid. And I said, "What?" And he said, "You can't, in fact, you can't play any sports." He said, "You're going to have to get a note from your doctor," because I had a heart murmur. So I figured, well, if I had that heart murmur 50 years ago and I'm still around, maybe it's not so bad. Well, actually, Mimi was the only person that basically said, "Well, keep an eye on it. You're fine." Fear is a killer. And she knows that. And I'm just pointing out that this is one unusual lady that took medicine to a whole nother level. Mimi, come on up.
Thank you so much, Bob. Now, I do have a question given the poop in the pants. Were you the only Jewish guy in Catholic school? You know that raise your hand and get ignored? It's very, very common. Are we okay for sound? Great. Well, I want to thank Bob because this is a unique venue, and it's a unique venue because it allows us to be who we are, not who we're expected to be. And for many, many years, I was who I was expected to be. And that meant I was a cardiologist who was good at doing what they expected me to be, which was making a diagnosis and then applying a treatment strategy to that diagnosis, which usually meant medication or surgery. And I never, ever, in all of my training and experience, got the essence of anyone. There was no time for essence. There was no time for sense of. who is this human being? Who is this person with the blocked coronary artery? I wasn't trained to appreciate who they were as human beings, who their lives were, who were the loves in their lives, where their broken heart came from. I really believed for many, many years that broken hearts came from high cholesterol, high blood pressure, cigarettes, and diabetes. Now, I won't stand here and say to you that these aren't important, because I think we all know they are important. But I've also learned from my patients that broken hearts come from social isolation, they come from depression, they come from anger, they come from fear, and they come from lack of love. And so these lessons that I learned from my patients propelled me, if you might, to not only continue to work on the mechanical heart with the stents and the angioplasty, but to really go on a journey of looking at my own life first and what was potentially missing, which was being in the moment. We're not trained as physicians to be in the moment. And that 25-year Scripps partner that Bob mentioned is Ronnie King, who's sitting in the back there, who really put me on the path somewhat reluctantly from being a physician to being a healer. And so I thought what I would share today was some excerpts from my book, because I think they're pertinent to today's conversation. And I think they're a springboard for where we might go and get us out of our head. And as Rowney taught me, she would say, take the longest 18-inch journey to your heart. And that's taken me, I would say, at least 15 years. So I'd like to share with you some sections from a chapter that I wrote called The Universal Heart, because the universal heart is about love. Now, growing up in a Catholic family, I was raised with the Sacred Heart and the power of the Sacred Heart. And I never really understood that as a kid, the spiritual power implications of that. And I certainly, as a cardiologist, never thought about the universal heart. So it goes something like this. In the Far East, elephant trainers often secure a rope to a baby elephant's leg to limit its range. This is how they actually train the elephant. As the elephant grows, they regularly reinforce the boundary of this rope. By the time the elephant is an adult, he has matured into a huge and powerful animal who has the strength to easily break that rope. But by then, he has grown so accustomed to being restrained that he has no concept of the strength that he possesses. So if we think about that for a second, what were the ropes that were put on us? Was the rope that we are not pretty enough? Was the rope that we're not thin enough? That we're not smart enough? That we can't be something that we wanted to be? I don't know about you, but I had many of those ropes put on me. I was told what I can be, how I can be, what was the right way to be. And even as a physician, I was told it's not right to show your emotions. It's not right to hug your patients. It's not right to be love. That's a sign of weakness. So what are the ropes that we have? As humans, we are conditioned to live within a limited perception of our own consciousness and power. We're taught by Western science to consider ourselves separate souls, bags of flesh, bones, and glands, islands of consciousness confronting an alien world. And I was struck by what Alan Watts had to say. He had this to say: we are encouraged to believe that the mind, body, and spirit are split and fragmented. And that's how I was trained as a cardiologist. Just deal with the body, Dr. Guarneri, forget everything else. That if we can't quantify something, it's not real. This is one of the great mysteries of life. The ability to know that something is real. Isn't this what we call faith? Is faith believing without seeing? Is faith knowing without seeing? But what if we weren't really living in a world of division, separation, and alienation, but one of connection and interdependence? What if we were all part of the same source and blueprint, woven together in an inherent unity that is infinite and enduring? What if we knew scientifically that everything in the universe is eternal, alive, and evolving? That's what SAIOE is about. SAIOE is about taking us to that place of inner knowing, that place of consciousness. And it's a consciousness that extends not only within the boundaries of this room, but to a much higher realm. Because thought, as Bob said, is the most powerful element that we have. So I'd like to share with you one story which woke me up to this reality. One of my mentors was someone you all are intimately, I'm sure, knowledgeable about, Larry Dossey. And Larry had this to say. Larry seeks to propose that consciousness is not confined to an individual body. This is kind of deep, but can radiate outside and impact others through techniques such as intercessory prayer, healing intention, and the other word I like to think of for healing intention is love, which is the essence of today's meeting. Intercessory prayer, healing intention, and visualization. He calls this the non-local mind. Mind spread infinitely throughout space and time, unconfined to the brain and body, eternal and immortal. And I say this as I look directly at Gary, because this is the foundation, I believe, Gary, for your work. And we're so blessed to have you here to talk about that. So I was in my office one day, and one of my very elderly patients came to see me. And he came to see me because he had to have an emergency surgery. Now, I think you can imagine the last thing I wanted to do was to have my elderly patient with bad heart disease undergo an emergency surgery, anesthesia, and all the risks associated with the above. At the age of 66, Stu was a long-time beloved patient, a former jazz musician, gregarious and upbeat, no matter what life dished out to him. He had lost many things in his life through my 10-year relationship with him. He lost his wife, his home, and many of his friends. But when he would come to the office, you would never know this. He was always upbeat. We would say his glass is half full. He's inspired. He was appreciative. He'd always talk about how blessed he was. And he would always ask, "How are you today?" Dr. Guarneri. Whenever I asked how he was doing, he answered, "Not bad for an old man." Given his arterial blockage and weakened heart, we had managed to keep him alive far longer than the textbooks would have predicted. I saw his survival as a collaboration between all of us. His love of life, his spirit, had merged with our procedures, our toolbox, our drugs. I thought those were the things that were really important. I had deep admiration for him as a brave and caring person who was always willing to lend a helping hand, even when he had difficulty walking. I remember him giving up his seat in the clinic. He was with a walker to let someone else sit down. He was a reminder to me of the innate healing powers my patients possessed, powers that needed to be nurtured, encouraged, and evoked whenever possible. Our healing powers are taken away when someone says words like, "You have cancer." How we process that, the prescription we send to our brain. The message we send to our brain will write prescriptions for the rest of our body. Words that harm, words that heal. At that point, he showed me his hand. His middle finger was dangling down. I'll never forget it. It was like this. "I have to get this fixed. How am I going to throw my fastball?" "I see your point," I joked. But underneath, I was really worried. Given his multiple medical problems, I wasn't happy with the idea of him having surgery or anesthesia. I stalled, looked at his records. "Listen, Stu, how would you feel about my giving you a healing touch treatment?" I have to say, I learned healing touch from Rowney. And I went through all 5 levels. And I only agreed to do that because I was so sick one time, and I was open enough to let her do a treatment on me that radically changed not only my physical body, but my emotional body. So I went ahead and I took this training. So he said, "Healing touch? That sounds like something new age." Not at all. In fact, it's ancient. It dates back to Hippocrates. It's based on the idea that the body, mind, and emotions have an energy field. And when you're healthy, the field is ordered. And when you're ill, the field is disturbed. That's how I explained it to him. He seemed surprised at my explanation. "And you would do this for me yourself?" I wasn't sending him somewhere. I nodded. He shrugged and smiled. "I'm game, especially if it doesn't hurt." For the next 20 minutes, I forgot about all the incidentals. And it's true. I was able to enter a sacred space, a space of healing. I wasn't worried anymore about his cholesterol level, his blocked arteries. Instead, I focused on his great reservoir of strength, as well as my love for him. All I can give him that day was love and healing intention. That's all I could do. For a bit of time that August morning, I perceived us as 2 fields of light and energy joined together. I wrote out the prescription cleared for surgery, and he went on his way. A week later, I was relieved when I heard that he was on the phone. "How was the surgery?" "Well, that's what I'm calling to tell you. I didn't need it. The day after you did your treatment, my hand was back to normal. The surgery was canceled. I feel great." So I had to stop. And I thought about this. And these were the thoughts that went through my mind. My rational medical mind immediately began to look for an excuse for this healing. I decided that his inflammation subsided and that's all that needed to happen. his scar tissue got better, and I went on and on. And then I had to stop myself. It dawned on me that I didn't need to do this anymore, that I could still be a cardiologist that can do all of the mechanical things, and then I can still dive into the mystery of healing. I came to appreciate the collective heart in all its infinite variety, starting its timid tick deep in a mother's womb, just as an ancient heart in a nursing home finally falls silent, so that the beat continues throughout time. It is the rhythm of our great eternal life. The split that existed in me as a physician was finally mended. I was able to reach in and be able to accept the gift of knowing. That's not to say I can always heal, but I can always be love. I can always have a healing intention. And healing is, of course, different from curing. And it doesn't mean that I've put aside my medications, because I haven't. A lot of our nurses are here, and they know that. But what it does mean is I never, ever take for granted that there are things in this life that God, I believe God has given us, that we need to tap into, that are more powerful than Lipitor and Celebrex and surgery. And today, we are going to embark on some of those mysteries and unleash. My wish for everyone here is that we unleash the power of SAIOE in each and every one of you. So thank you for your attention. Try to keep us on. Good. I was trying to keep us on time, so thank you so much. Yeah. What's kind of nice is to just be able to stand up here and get the essence of this room. I hope everyone can feel the beautiful energy in this room. When I talk about non-local mind, intercessory prayer, healing intention, spirit, spirituality, there's one person who comes to mind, and that's Dr. Gary Schwartz. You know, Gary carries all of the right degrees. He's been trained at Harvard. He's a Yale professor, and he's now at the University of Arizona he has the director of the Frontier Medicine Research Lab. He has many, many titles which are in your book. But I think for me, the most important thing is the work that Gary is doing. Because for many, many years, I've always said the mysticism deserves a mechanism. And my vision is that we will move from what is now called frontier medicine to mainstream medicine. And we won't be talking about the mystery anymore, but we will be able to train hundreds of thousands of people to unleash the power that we have within and within the collective consciousness of the universe. Gary?
Hold on 1 second. We've had an hour gone by, and Larry Payne is here to help us with doing a yoga stretch. And Larry is about love, and he has spent his entire life contributing. He has an enormous reputation in the people that have all kinds of medical problems, back problems. He's worked with medical doctors, and Larry is actually involved in a course at Marymount College, where he works with medical doctors, and he teaches young physicians or physicians to be about the power of yoga. And yoga is a lot more than just the exercise that we all know. There's a lot more to it. Larry Payne.
Sorry, Gary. Shit. I'm on to meet you. If you're enjoying yourself, raise your right hand. Great. If you're really enjoying yourself, raise your left hand. Great. If you're ecstatic, raise both arms. Good. You just did your first yoga routine. All right. Since the topic today is secrets of love, I thought of a touching story of a 92-year-old widow that was still looking for secrets of love. So she ran an ad on the internet. And she said there was only 3 requirements. Number 1, you can never beat me. Number 2, you can never run around on me. And number 3, I still want to make love. Only apply in person. So the next morning there was a loud ring on the doorbell, and she rushed over and she opened the door and she looked down, and there was a man in a wheelchair with no arms or legs. And she said, "Sir, you've got no arms." He said, "I'll never beat you." He said, "You've got no legs." He says, "I'll never run around on you." She says, "Well, what about sex?" I rang the doorbell, didn't I? Now that I have your full attention, I want to talk to you a little bit about the yoga off the mat. You know, a lot of people who do yoga, they go in once or twice a week, and then the rest of the week, you know, the average person takes somewhere between 1 and 10,000 steps a day. So if the walk's not right, or you're not sitting just right, you know, it causes some problems. And there's so many great speakers here today talking about more of the emotional aspects that yoga also covers. But I'm talking to you a little bit about the mechanical ones that you'll remember. So here's a little example of something I hope you always remember. Please hold up 2 fingers. Take 1 index finger and put it on top of the other. Now, when you first put it there, you're going to feel it in the tip of your finger. And if we stay here for a little while, you're going to feel it in your hand. And if we stay a little longer, you're going to feel it in your shoulder. And if you stay here for half an hour, you're going to feel it in your neck. This is exactly what's happening to your lower back when you sit and round forward and push the lumbar curve in the wrong direction. And all you have to do, at least once in an hour, is just to unwind that and go the other direction. So I want to show you 2 ways to help that very simply. Stay in your quiet space and just stand up. And pretend like you're reaching for apples on a tree. And whatever I'm asking you to do, if it doesn't feel good, don't do it. Other side, just reach up. It's just so simple. So what you're doing is you're reestablishing your lumbar curve in your back. And 4 out of every 5 Americans will seek professional help for a back problem, and you can prevent that, okay? Now, let's sit down a moment together. And there are some times when it's just not appropriate to stand. So in other words, let's say that Gary Swartz is speaking and it's been more than an hour. You don't want to stand up in the middle of his talk. So here's something that you can do from your seat. Move to the front of your seat. Reach back and either hold the bottom of the chair from the back or the sides. And unless you're having some shoulder problem or something like that, begin to squeeze your shoulder blades together. Now, a 92-year-old yoga teacher taught me this. Her name was Indra Devi. She's not the one on the internet, all right? And now if you have no neck problems at all, none, slowly look up. Even if you didn't think you had one, it hurts, don't do it. Good, and just take some breaths through the nose on the inhale and the exhale. So what you're doing, again, is you're bringing your lumbar curve, your cervical curve back into where it started. And then nice and slow, release. Good. All right? That's all it takes. Give yourself a hand. Thank you very much. And now is Gary next? All right. Well, I'm going to let you do it, but Gary, I hope this helps you.
Gary Schwartz's book, The Living Energy Universe, twice, and I'm about to read it a third time. This is one amazing man, and he's written 2 other books since the living, one other book, since the living, 3. All right, okay. And they're all terrific. And Gary has actually came to Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas and did a SAIO, the first one. And then he did a second SAIO in Santa Barbara. And then he did a third SAIO at Two Bunch Palms. And he did a fourth SAIO. And when I called Gary up, I said, Gary, we're really looking forward to you being here. And he said, wait a minute. I'm in Florida right now, and I'm going to be in Florida at that time, and then I have to go to New York. And in the process of doing that, I have not had any rest in a couple of months. And he said, I promised my wife that we're going to rest a little bit in Florida and then fly directly to New York. And I couldn't even talk. It just wouldn't be the same without Gary. And I didn't say anything. And Gary said, disregard what I said. He said, I will fly out, I will do it, and then I'll go to New York.
Wow. Is this an amazing group of people or what? And I'm talking about everybody in the audience. Here's what Bob didn't tell you. He then subsequently called me and said, actually, Gary, there's something I'd like you to do to come to me. I'd actually like you to talk about inspiration. He said, I heard you give a lecture for the Scripps. Scripps is one of the what's the word? Not facilitators, but sponsors of a Holistic Nursing Association meeting that I was invited to that Ronnie was intimately involved with. And he said, I heard you speak, and he said, I was very impressed that people seem to have been inspired by your presentation. And he said, I'd like you to talk about inspiration. And I gulped. First of all, no one's ever asked me to speak about inspiration. Secondly, I had no idea what I would say about inspiration. But he asked me, and he's a good guy. So I said, okay, I'm willing to do this. And then he said, of course, you can't do any preparation. There's going to be no PowerPoint. And I figured it was just going to be like what it was last year. You know, we'd get around in circles and we'd chat, and something would come to me. Of course, I had no idea what this was going to be. So we get here last night, late in the afternoon, and eventually there's a knock on the door, and I receive a program. And now I see I'm listed to speak. He didn't tell me that. So I said, wow, I'd better think about what I'm going to say about a topic that I've never spoken about, because I feel an obligation, to honor his request. So what do I do when that happens? Well, what I do is I ask the universe, which is, since I don't have answers most of the time, that's where I go. Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night, and a number of amusing things happened. And since I was prepared for this, because I had actually discussed a little bit this with Rhonda, I was prepared for magic to happen. And so let me share a little bit of this, because it speaks to, in part, how it is that I live SAIO with that fuel, and how that inspiration, that fuel, is so related to love. First of all, I woke up in the middle of the night and had to go to a place that I sometimes affectionately call the sacred space. where I don't think I've ever lost my underwear, but... And the room that we were staying in happens to look out over there's a pool, and I guess it was going in some direction. Actually, I don't know what direction. But I noticed that there was this bright star out there. In fact, it was the only star that I could see. And it was really bright, and it was up over the pool. And so I went out to take a look at this, and I inferred that it must have been Venus. I don't know whether it was Venus, but it could have been Venus. And I said, gee, that's odd. Look, there's that bright star. I even took a picture with my iPhone. I now carry an iPhone, and I carry an iPad, which I'm actually going to use for the first time in a lecture. And I took a picture of Venus. Now, if I remember correctly, isn't Venus related to love? Yeah. I said, gee, that's odd. I mean, how often do I wake up in the middle of the night, and there's Venus shining through the window? It reminded me of something called synchronicity. And by the way, how many of you have experienced synchronicities? Most of you, right? Would you say that when you experience synchronicity, sometimes you feel inspiration? How many of you experience inspiration when you have synchronicity? Some of you? Okay. Well, I have this a lot. Some of them are little. Some of them are huge. Synchronicities for me are one of the sources of inspiration. Rhonda, by the way, calls it the continuity of encouragement from the universal mind. By the way, I haven't heard the term universal heart before, and I apologize to Mimi for not having read her book, although I have a copy of it. Now I'm going to have to read that chapter. It's a very beautiful concept, by the way. Synchronicities, I've come to realize, are like gifts. They're cosmic gifts. A person recently said to me, actually, I think it was a rabbi, or rabbi-related, which we'll get to, and he called them kisses from God. And they could be really tiny or really huge. So let me give you an example of a really tiny one. A few days ago, there was this fly on the glass outdoors. And I'm looking at this fly. I don't typically see a fly staring at me in the glass. And there's this fly looking at me. And I'm watching this fly, and I'm realizing and remembering that this fly can fly. Have you ever thought about what it takes and what it would have taken for someone to invent a being with these tiny little wings? To flutter that body, to enable it to do all the aerodynamics that it does? What kind of brilliance, what kind of creativity would it take to create a fly? So I was pondering the magic of flyness while I was looking at this fly. Last night before we went to sleep, I turned on the TV, and what was playing, but one of the movies I have to turn to, was a movie called Men in Black. How many of you have seen that silly movie? Okay. And there is this wonderful scene, which I just happened to turn into, where the physician, who's a pathologist, was being held captive by this bug that was in a human form. I don't know if you remember this scene, but at some point, after she's holding on to him, and then he grabs her by the throat and so on, and he said, when you were a kid, he said, have you ever pulled off the wings of a fly? And he said, well, it's time for the flies to get even. And I'm saying to myself, gee, I just was thinking about flies, and now I'm seeing flies. Now, by the way, we're just sitting here, and I don't know whether it was a mosquito or a flea or a fly, but it was buzzing around. It wouldn't go away from my head. So I have to bring up the flies. Now, we can laugh about this, or we can ignore this, or we can become inspired by it. What is the universe doing that makes it possible for us to have these kinds of moments? Well, I live in this kind of world of synchronicity. I buried a synchronicity in the back of a book I wrote called The GOD Experiments. It was the first one I ever had. It was at Yale University, and this will become important momentarily. I've then included a number of synchronicities in a new book that's going to be coming out very shortly called The Sacred Promise, with the subtitle, How Science is Discovering Spirit's Collaboration with Us in Our Daily Lives. It is by far probably the boldest book I have written yet. And there are two more books that are completed, which are devoted entirely to synchronicities. And this guy and other people in this audience, I mean, I sort of like, once you get into that mode of appreciating inspiration and being open to inspiration and the essence of it, it's sort of like it just keeps unfolding. And I had a really odd one, triggered by this man. Well, he was the second in the series, but it's the one that's oddest, which I'm going to share a little bit about, because I want you to ponder this, because it's not about me. A little sidebar. A few years ago, I was in Santa Fe. Actually saw Larry Dossey on that trip. And in a particular store, the details of which are not important, the following phrase came to me, image. And it was, it's not me, it's the energy. And it's not you, it's the universe. There was this sense, somehow, that there was this energy, this living energy, this oneness of it all. And that, yes, we have our individual islands of consciousness, but we're also part of this collective, and the more open we are, the more it comes through us, which, of course, is what Bob has been sharing with us and teaching with us. Well, here are the beginning of a set of odd, if not unbelievable, truths, unbelievable things that really happened. And the very last one just happened an hour ago that relates to the sequence. And I'm going to share it before I go on, just so you can understand this, because it's not about me. Here's the story. In another week, I'm going back to the East Coast to attend the first ever conference that I've ever attended on the science of synchronicity. It's being held at Yale University, at the School of Divinity, as part of what's called a program in science, religion, and technology, something like that, by a gentleman by the name of James Van Pelt is the director, and of that program. And here I am now going back to, quote, my alma mater, or one of them, to participate in a science conference, which is where synchronicity began for me. And of course, I had to come back from the East Coast because I had to be here, which I'm thrilled about, okay? Truly honored and thrilled about. And he was writing me a formal invitation, James, the director, formal invitation, even though I was partly inspirational for the creation of this conference. And he said, Gary, he said, finally, I know you're very busy and so on, but here's your official invitation because I know you want one. And the invitation reads, Dear Rabbi Wiener. No joke, Dear Rabbi Wiener. Now, no one has ever called me a rabbi before. He should know better. My name is Gary Schwartz. He obviously made a, quote, mistake. So I wrote back to him, I said, listen, James, I said, thank you very much. I said, but I'm not a rabbi. And I said, not only that, although yesterday, which was true, I actually be driving on what's called Grant Avenue in Tucson, and I saw this outdoor hot dog stand, and I actually thought about getting a hot dog, and I don't typically eat hot dogs. I'm mostly vegetarian, but I'm thinking about eating a hot dog, and now I've got an email that says Rabbi Wiener. No joke. And I said, could you explain, I think you've sent this to the wrong person. I don't think anything more of it. Meanwhile, 2 messages have been left on a cell phone, which was actually left at my house. I was actually, I think, in California at the time. I have to carry 2 cell phones, which is a sidebar, which is not important right now. And the one that I use in my car, I left home, but I had forwarded still to that phone, so I wasn't getting it on my regular number. He leaves these 2 messages that I get back on a Monday or a Tuesday. And he says, Gary, he says, I'm all excited. I want you to know there's this famous rabbi who's agreed to come to the SAIOE event. A Rabbi Shui or Schmoozie's or somebody, I didn't know who he was. No, I don't mean to be any offensive to, I now gather it's Rabbi Shmuley? Okay, no offense to him, I just never heard of him, which is not, again, terribly important. I don't know most people. And he's telling me of that this rabbi coming, and that Mimi was even exciting. Where are you, Mimi? Okay, where are you? I want to see you. Oh, there you are, okay. Apparently, this was an endorsement for the rabbi. And I'm saying to myself, I'm going to an event, and I'm going to be sharing a podium, at least even something, with a rabbi. Now, that's never happened to me before. I didn't think anything more about it. 2 days later, I'm giving a workshop. I do a regular Friday afternoon workshop at Canyon Ranch called Awakening the Power Within, Achieving Optimal Health Through Energy Healing. It's essentially Energy Healing 101 for lay people. And it's a privilege to be able to do this. And I give the workshop, usually to a small group of people, 3 to 5 people. It's a real great privilege. And this husband and wife, they stay afterwards. Turned out she had been a Yale undergraduate, had been at Yale when I was, hadn't taken a course with me, but her best friend, who had recently passed, apparently took a course that I gave in psychology and medicine, which apparently inspired her, influenced her. So she knew about me. And now she's at the ranch, and she hears I'm doing this workshop, and she says, Gary, I don't want you to take this wrong. She said, but my husband and I have decided, she said, we want you to know something. You're a rabbi. I said, excuse me? I say this a lot. I said, what do you mean I'm a rabbi? Now, some of you don't know this about me, but I was raised in an ultra-reform Jewish home, which meant we did nothing Jewish. We did have Hanukkah, which meant we lit candles. But save for that, we did nothing Jewish. As far as I know, my parents would have been atheists. We never discussed God. I grew up in an all-Christian community, which I was spiritually loved. I used to go to Catholic church, because 50% of it was Italian Catholic. I used to go to Catholic church on a regular basis with my Italian girlfriends, really cute. The church services were in Latin in those days. I had no idea what they were talking about. I used to play basketball with the Young Methodist League. Okay. So anyway, I knew nothing about any of this. I have no connection to rabbis. None. Now maybe it's, quote, in my genes. Maybe it's part of the history of my genetics or whatever. But she made this comment that I was a rabbi. It wasn't like I reminded her of a rabbi. I was a, quote, rabbi. Well, I didn't take this all that seriously, but now I got 3 rabbis. Meanwhile, I've received a phone call from a gentleman. By the way, I actually prepared a PowerPoint early this morning because there were a couple of photographs. I wanted to show you a picture of the star, you know, the Venus. And I was going to show you a picture of this gentleman, which it's never happened to you before. This gentleman comes to see me. He's a quantum physicist turned Hasidic healer, Jewish mystical healer. But he's a scientist by training who is very well known in the Baltimore area. He was coming to Los Angeles, and he wanted to stop and bring a student of his because he wanted to talk to me about research. And he comes to me, and I had met him once before a couple of years earlier because of a guest at Kenya Ranch. Anyway, he comes to my lab. He looks like something out of the Middle Ages. You know the big white beard with the black hat and the black jacket and the tie and so on. He's got a shofar in his hand. Now, I'm pronouncing this wrong. That ram's horn or something, because he's going to. I've never had this happen to me in my lab. And I have a bust of Einstein that sits on my table. And sitting on the bust is a yarmulke. His yarmulke, with Hebrew letters on it. Now, I've never had I used to put an EEG cap on this bust and demonstrate movement energy effects with it. In fact, there was a recent video called Wake Up. Some of you may have seen this video. It's a wonderful video about a young man's journey to becoming awakened to a greater spiritual reality. And they included some segment of me, and there's literally me demonstrating on Einstein's bust this cap. So how I used it for demonstration, but never anybody put a yarmulke on it. So and this guy was a rabbi-like. He never fully got ordained. By the way, I went through level 3A of Healing Touch. I never went through level 5 and so on, but I learned enough just to really appreciate it. And so I asked him, I said, excuse me, I said, I've never seen a yarmulke with Hebrew writing on it, because I typically haven't, certainly not on my bust of Einstein. And he says, yes, there's Hebrew writing. And I said, could you tell me what some of those words are? I was just being intuitive. So he goes around, there are 4 or 5 words, and guess what one of the words was? Rabbi. So now Einstein's bust is wearing a rabbi's hat. I said, I hate to ask you this, Herschel. I said, but can I keep your yarmulke? So I've got a picture, which you can't see, of this man with my Einstein's bust wearing a rabbi. Now, yarmulke, that says rabbi. Now, why is this important? Because the fifth synchronicity related to rabbis was just a couple of days earlier. I had received a phone call from a professor at Tel Aviv University, a professor of education, did her PhD from the University of Chicago. She's a mature woman in her mid-60s. Husband died a few years ago, went on a spiritual quest. Long story, and she ended up working with a woman who is a medium and channel in Israel. They ultimately flew out to see me this past spring. I did a week's worth of testing with this woman. She was extraordinary, one of the most gifted mediums, psychics I've ever had the privilege of witnessing and testing. And we began doing some long-distance collaborative work. One of the people that supposedly is coming through with her in spades, partly stimulated by her time in Tucson, is, believe it or not, Albert Einstein. Now, this is another whole story. We don't have time to go through all of this. But anyway, so I'm hearing a lot about Einstein and physics formulas coming out of her and all this evidential stuff. But apparently, the reason why she was calling me, the professor, was that because something strange happened when Einstein comes through her, and she was confused about this. So what she did was she called a Hasidic rabbi, friend of hers, to get some counseling about all of this. And she's telling me what the rabbi thought about. Apparently in the Jewish tradition, you're not supposed to be cremated, and if you're cremated, you can't come back. And Einstein was cremated because they didn't want people to go to visit his gravesite. You know, his brain was apparently saved, but otherwise, and so he can't come back, and that's why she's having the experience that she's having. So meanwhile, when's the last time somebody's called me telling me that they've consulted a Hasidic rabbi about a formerly great physicist who's now coming through a research meeting? Now, this is all within 1 week. Rabbis. I have now had a total of 18 synchronicities involving rabbis. And I don't know what it means. Just this today, is it all right to mention a name? Because otherwise I'll keep this anonymous. I'm looking for a head yes or no. Okay. I had the privilege of reconnecting with Asher, who you're going to be hearing from later. Again, one of the amazing, inspired people in this room, source of inspiration. And after we were connecting and he was sharing some things with me, I sensed that there was connection here. And so I took Asher aside. I said, Asher, I want to ask you probably a strange question. I said, do you have any connection recently, anything having to do with rabbis? And I don't do this with most people. You know, Rhonda can attest to this. I don't just pick strangers out and say, hey, what do you know about rabbis? I mean, I'm very selective about this. So I asked him this. And he looks at me and he says, oh, Gary, he says, my family has a history of rabbis. In fact, my father was a very famous rabbi. And he wrote many books and writings and so on. He was an authority. He just passed away a few months ago. But apparently, up until the time that he fell and went into a coma, he was still actively writing. And then he says, and Gary, he said, you know, because I asked him, could I speak to your father? And he said, well, you know, he says, I'm connected like, he says, any rabbi you want to talk to. That was pretty much what he said. If you want to talk to this rabbi, I can arrange for you to do this. Now, how often do you think I bump into somebody whose father was a rabbi? I mean, we don't have time to go through all the rabbi stuff. The point is that these things happen, to me more so maybe than the average, but every time they happen to me, I get inspired by them. They're a source of inspiration for me. No more or less than the wings on a fly. Whether they're tiny or huge, we can be inspired by virtually everything if we're just open to experiencing it. So how does inspiration then relate to all these events relate to happiness and all sorts of love? Well, it's very meaningful to me. I was very touched that you were having this on love, because I would have much preferred to have given actually a lecture about love than to talk about inspiration. I used to teach a course called The Psychology of Love and Spirituality. I mean, I've thought about love a lot. Thought about virtually nothing about inspiration. Thanks to Bob, I now have to think about it. And it really is a fuel. A few months ago, I asked Rhonda, my wife, I asked her, I said, what does the word joy mean to you? Because that's also a word that we scientists don't typically think about. Well, pleasure, happiness, that we talk about. But what's joy? And so I asked her, here's essentially what she said, and every now and again she says things that I just stand in awe and then I write them down. And she said, joy is happiness infused with inspiration and lightness of being. For Rhonda, joy is happiness infused with inspiration. How's that? Not bad, right, Bob? Infused with inspiration and lightness of being. And I said, gee, that's beautiful, because I'd never heard it said like that before. And I could resonate with that. It spoke to me. By the way, Rhonda has a book that she just finished, it will be published we expect in the next few months, which is called Love Eternal. Because all of this is about love. It's all about love. So last night, as I was pondering all of this, the rabbis and the flies and the Venus and stuff, I'm being reminded of a poem that came to me, which I included in this book, The Sacred Promise. And I fortunately had that poem with me because I was in the process of proofing it, the first page proofs. So I had it on my iPod. So I went into the middle of it, because I never remembered this poem. I didn't write it, so to speak. You'll hear about this momentarily. Because I wrote something in there that I didn't write that was related to inspiration, and it speaks to energy and information and love and wisdom. And when I saw the poem, I realized, gee, maybe this would be something meaningful to share, and maybe I could end this brief communication with what this inspired in me, that maybe it would serve to stimulate thoughts in you. And then I realized that I had included it in a section on question and answers. And it may have been even maybe the last question here, because it was the most controversial. I'm going to read you what I wrote from the book. It's really amusing because Mimi read from her book, and there I am about to read from my book, albeit an electronic version. May I? Okay. Here was the question. What does Great Spirit or God have to do with all this? Can she, he, provide the ultimate guidance we need in our lives? My answer. These are profound scientific as well as spiritual questions. My working hypothesis is that the answers to those two questions are everything and yes. My conclusions about the probable existence of a universal intelligence and source of everything existing in the universe, including within us, are developed in detail in the GOD experiments. And that book explained how science, but slowly but surely, took me to God. Included in the GOD experiments was a poem that came to me. It is the only poem that, quote, I ever wrote. I say, quote, I here, in quotes, because the poem you're about to read appeared in my mind, fully formed, on an airplane as I was traveling to the East Coast. I was literally high in the sky when I experienced it. And for the record, I had not consumed any liquid spirits on the trip. I wrote down as much as I could remember of the poem, which was most of it, and then tweaked it a bit for clarity and rhythm. Now, it's very curious that you began, Greg, mentioning Mozart, if I remember correctly, and how he heard all of this. John Lennon has this wonderful quote about he would hear the experience of the spheres and the music of the spheres, and it came to him. Michael Jackson used to sit in a tree, and the information would come to him fully formed of these absolutely gorgeous songs, which he would then transcribe, all the rhythms, all the bass, all the orchestration. And yes, he would tweak some of it, but it was basically, it was the muses that he attributed to all of this. I wrote down as much as I could remember of the poem, which was most of it, and then tweaked it a bit for clarity and rhythm. For example, when I first put the poem on paper, I literally wrote it out by hand. The next to the last phrase read, "Enlightened compassion, the flight of the dove." I had no idea what this meant at the time. So I later tweaked it to read, awakened compassion, a gift from above. Now, if the original line is more poetic and has greater spiritual meaning than my attempt at editing, we can attribute the original to something other than my logical mind. The poem expresses the parallel relationship between information and energy on the one hand, in science, and soul and spirit on the other, in spirituality. I've included the poem below partly because of the direct relevance to the Sacred Promise, which is this new book, and partly because it reminds us that there's a deep parallel that exists between science and spirituality and is increasingly coming into focus in the 21st century. Though each of the individual stanzas in the poem are easy to read, their meanings are quite deep. You may find it helpful to reread the poem and ponder each stanza with a questioning mind and a caring heart. Is the soul like information, and is spirit like energy? By the way, Greg said something which was so amazing. I was just reminded of this because he had never said this before. I don't remember exactly what he said precisely. I trust that he wrote it down. But we had a parallel. Ooh, you got it? I did. Now let's see if I can read this. It says, heart without mind is useless, and mind without heart is empty. Is that a beautiful thought? Heart without mind is useless, and mind without heart is empty. Take this back. I do not want you to lose this. You've got to hold on to this. What had come to me was that information without energy was powerless, and energy without information was purposeless. And that together was where the real power came, that combination. So I want you to think about this and ponder it, because maybe, if nothing else, it will trigger some thoughts. And what did Bob tell us about thoughts? The most powerful of everything. Soul is information, spirit is energy, received and edited by Gary E. Schwartz. So here we go. You ready? Yeah. You're supposed to say yes. Yes. Thank you, otherwise I'll get off now. All right, here we go. By the way, I don't think I've ever read this poem out loud before, just like I've never spoken about inspiration before. Here we go.
Speak, Rabbi, speak.
Do you know what rabbi means, by the way? Anybody know? It means teacher. And if I understand correctly, at least that's one of its meanings. And I was trained to be a, quote, teacher. I'm a, quote, professor, supposedly. So in that sense, I could be a, quote, rabbi. And all of us can be rabbis, because all of us can be teachers. In fact, we serve. I mean, I'm a perennial student, always learning from everything and everyone around me, including the fleas and the flies and the rabbi moments. But we also, through our modeling and so on, can pass on the gifts that we've received and share them with others. Here we go. What, pray tell, are spirit and soul? Are they one and the same? Are soul and spirit a functional whole derived from a common name? Or is it the case that soul and spirit reflect two sides of a coin, where soul reflects the information that fits, and spirit the energy that joins? You remember you talked about two sides of a coin. Somebody said this to me recently. Is soul the story, the plan of life, the music we play, our score? Is spirit the passion, the fire of life, our motive to learn, to soar? Soul directs the paths we take, the guidance that structures our flow. Spirit feels very alive, awake, the force that moves us to grow. If soul is plan and spirit is flame, then matter is alive, you see. Nature may play a majestic game of information and energy. I'd love to believe that wisdom and joy, ooh, there's joy. I'd love to believe that wisdom and joy reflect God's plans and dreams. That soul and spirit are more than toys, and both are more than they seem. Could it be that the soul of God is the wisest of plans so grand, and the Spirit of God is the lightning rod that inspires God's loving hand? And that was the line. And the Spirit of God is the lightning rod that inspires God's loving hand. Now remember, I didn't write this. I don't still know what a lot of this means. Could soul be wisdom and spirit be love? Together a divine partnership? Purpose and passion, a duet from above? The ultimate relationship? The relationship of spirit to soul, so simple, profound, this team. For spirit and soul, the ultimate goal, to understand this theme. Soul is wisdom, spirit is love, information and energy. Awaken to compassion, a gift from above. Someday, pray tell, you'll see. Here's how this ends in the book. And I think this is a good place for us to end this moment, because we will have lots of time to continue conversations, so especially since we have the circles, where you will be educating me. You may wonder, as do I, was the essence of this poem, essence, given to me by the energy of the Great Spirit? Could this have been a special moment high in the sky where I briefly received information, quote, from, quote, the wisest of plans so grand? We're at the Grand Del Mar, right? And experienced, quote, the lightning rod that inspires God's loving hand. Has the author, quote, lost his mind? Or has he found his soul? As Einstein reminds us, the important thing is not to stop questioning. So Bob, thank you for bringing us together, because of you, we have these moments.
Okay. Well, we're going to have a chance to to ask some questions of Gary, Mimi, or myself about SAIOE. Before we do that, when I told you that I had stomach cancer, and I said that my bones had deteriorated, and then I said that I had pretty much accepted that I was going to die, it was after that occurred that there was an energy change, and that was the birth of SAIOE. And what the energy change is that I no longer worried about it. I no longer worried about my business. I no longer worried about anything really. I just figured I'm just going to let go. And in the process of letting go, I had certain things occur. And as I started to get better and stronger and healthier, I started to question what's going on. I feel stronger, I feel better, my knees don't hurt, my back doesn't hurt, what's going on? And what happened was that I was in a state where I just truly was getting a sense of life for the first time in my life. I was sensing life and the beauty of it. And I said, I'm in my 40s, and I've lived a long, healthy life till now, and I'm just going to let go. So I had a sense of life, and I began to appreciate everything. I walked around, everything was just beautiful, and people were beautiful. I just appreciated things because I wanted to leave that way. And I became inspired, and I realized that I had an openness that I didn't have before. Before, I was just doing one thing after the other, and believe me, I ate right, I exercised. When I say ate right, I ate pretty darn good. I exercised, I did everything that I needed to do to be healthy, and except that I wasn't in the moment. I was all about finishing this, starting that. Getting through this, getting through that. So I felt inspired, and I was open. And these words weren't clear. And actually, I was with my brother in Kona, and he had recently retired, sort of. He was kind of trying to retire. And he said to me, I think, he said, this is really powerful stuff. He said, but it's in the wrong order. And I said, what? What's in the wrong order? He said, it's in the wrong order. I said, okay. And at that point, I was advanced enough to realize that there was no order. And I just didn't say anything, because there is no order. I realized that these thought processes gave me happiness, made me feel good, that I felt love because the love was coming from me through appreciation. I was inspired, I was open. I really felt things, and all my disease disappeared. And my business became easy. And developing things and formulations became easy. And everything was easy when I stopped thinking about it, but just kind of let it occur, let the information flow. So I just wanted to finish that and to also point out that these great people that came in life that we hear about were all mentor trained. They didn't learn, they learned in a mentor relationship. And the other thing that's important about SAIOE is that there's a book called there's a book out about the brain by a brain scientist that has spent his whole life studying the brain, been to many, many universities, and it's called The Essence of Thought. What is it? I can't think of it now, but it basically is it's the okay, it'll as soon as I stop thinking about it, it'll come to me. But anyway, this guy really figured out that every neurologist, every brain surgeon, all the doctors in the world that basically were misinformed, and there was something going on, and that Einstein's brain had been sliced and spliced and sent all over the world to every university. That was all agreed upon before he died, to try to figure out what the heck's going on, where did this genius come from? And what was discovered was that we don't use 10% of our brains like everybody says. We're only using 10% of our brains. The 10% came from the fact that there are 10% neurons in the brain, and the rest of it is unidentified. It's called the glia of the brain. And that part of the brain is, I got it, the root of thought. That's the name of the book, The Root of Thought. So I basically, that really got my attention, that thought is, that neurons are basically memory, and that, wow, we're not computers. We're not even like computers. Even Einstein said that memory had nothing to do with intelligence. Of course, now we have computers where you can press a button and it says, ask the professor, and he'll correct your English and spell check and everything like that. Mathematics has all been formulated, logarithms, all the stuff, it's all done. It's the only thing that's important now is imagination, character. Yes, okay. So, the root of thought, and this is what they now know, where does genius come from? Where does intelligence come? It comes from use. That basically what you use is how your brain develops. And one of my absolute incredibly inspirational stories is the story of Rostropovich, who is considered the greatest cellist in the world. And his father was the greatest cellist in Europe. And his father and his mom, his father was a world famous cellist, and his mother was an opera singer and a piano player. And she played the piano to accompany Rostropovich, who played the cello, and they were booked all over Europe for years. Well, something happened. Rostropovich's mom, he wasn't born yet at that point, got pregnant. And they decided that they didn't want to break all these engagements. So in her pregnancy, she continued to play the piano and do her opera and accompany Rostropovich. Rostropovich is born now, and they have all these concerts. They're booked all over. So Rostropovich is wrapped up in a blanket and put in his father's cello case. And his cello case is right in front of him as he plays the cello. And a cello is a big instrument, so Rostropovich didn't start to play the cello until he was 8 or 9 years old, because they didn't have the little ones then, I guess. Maybe they did, but he started when he was 8 or 9 to play the cello. And they said, God, he's so amazing. He just learns so quickly. He seems to know it before he plays it. He's just amazing. And as time went on, he ultimately became the greatest cellist of all time. And I heard him in Orange County in his late 70s. Just went to the bone. This man is that amazing. Rostropovich was asked, when did you begin playing the cello? And he said, I always played the cello. He was asked that question and challenged. And he said, I always played the cello. So this is a mentorship of learning. It's the glia of the brain developing from exposure. Your daughter. We were just talking about that earlier. So anyway, I just wanted to say that. We're going to go right in. Does anybody have questions of any of us about SAIOE? You might have to shout it out, Bill.
Yeah. Two, one for Mimi and one for Gary. In the course of your talking, Gary, I was inspired to come up with two questions. And one is how are we connected? We hear the New Age thought that everything and everyone is connected. And I wanted to ask you to comment on that. And the second one is, in the field of energy, the quote is often, God is love. And I wondered if you could expound a bit on that.
Wow, okay. Two simple little questions. The answer is yes and yes. The first question is, how are we all interconnected? Well, there are different levels by which physics speaks to that. The first is that we are all interconnected in our physical forms. So for example, by electromagnetic fields, take the magnetic fields. We now know that the magnetic field of the heart, and actually all tissues, all cells, this magnetic field extends out into space. With SQUIDs, superconductive quantum interference devices, we now know you can pick up the magnetic signal from the heart, which is the largest, by the way, magnetic signal of any organ in the body. And you can pick it up, depending upon the sensitivity of the equipment and the appropriate shielding, for quite a distance. Now, what that means is literally that right now, each of us are literally inside the magnetic fields of each other's hearts. We're literally swimming, embedded, interconnected by those magnetic fields. And energy is a capacity to do work and overcome resistance. Magnetic fields are defined by their ability to have an effect. So consequently, those magnetic fields are literally affecting our cells. Each of our magnetic fields are affecting each other's magnetic fields to various degrees. Now, physics tells us, how far does a field extend out into space? Did anybody know?
Infinite.
And how far is infinite?
Infinite.
Yeah, it's pretty far. So by that definition alone, we are interconnected. Now, if we're going to go beyond that, we're going to look into the quantum realm, for example. We're going to look into other kinds of fields. The level of interconnection is even greater. And then, of course, we could get to the notion of what kind of physics would you need to talk about a non-local consciousness, at which point it's then everything is interconnected. If you really take the logic of contemporary physics, established contemporary physics, seriously, nothing is independent of everything else. And the first person to bring that home, which addresses your second question, was actually Sir Isaac Newton. Because here's what Newton claimed. He claimed that every mass had a gravitational field, right? So if we held an apple or a pen, or you and I, we have a pretty big magnetic field, gravitational field. What direction does it pull? Well, it doesn't just pull down, it pulls up, it pulls in all directions. It's going out 360 degrees in three-dimensional space. How far does it extend? It extends infinitely. Everything is pulling on everything to various degrees. I cannot move my hand and move it toward Mimi, for example, and she's very energy sensitive, so she immediately, I apologize for putting my hand in your face. It's certainly the energy from my hand. But when I do this, okay, I'm literally, with my gravitational field, interacting with all of your gravitational fields, as well as the sun and the moon and everything else, and all the distant things. Now, here's what Newton claimed. This gravitational field, this universal field, extended out in all directions. It was an attractive field. That is, it pulls. It was attractive, it was mutually attractive. Everything's pulling on everything else. It's completely non-prejudicial. Doesn't matter whether you're a big star or a little star. Whether you're black or white, even whether you're a good star or a bad star. It's going to hold it all together. This force is 100% dependable. You can trust it. Every now and again I'll do an experiment, I'll take a pen and I drop it and it falls to the ground. I will even do this as a demonstration for students, and I will just tell them that, you know, when I lose faith in humanity, when I lose faith in nature, what I do is I drop things, because they fall. And on the Earth, when I do this experiment, yes, I know that space things can happen differently. I can't speak to what happens in another galaxy or another universe. And I'm open to the possibility that somebody with advanced training in yoga or whatever can make it do it differently. All I know is every time I've dropped a pen, you want to see? Watch. Look at this. You ready? I'll do the experiment. There it is. It happened again. 100% of the time. How do we explain that? Well, we talk about gravity. It's completely dependable. By the way, just a sidebar before I get to the punchline of your question. I'll ask students a quick question, say, okay, explain this about gravity, getting to the mechanism. And then I'll ask the students, I'll say, I'm going to ask you a trick question. Trick question means it's not the answer you think it is. Can we measure gravity? They look at me like you're looking at me. And then I say, well, how do we measure gravity? We drop things. We measure needles on a dial move. And then what we do is we infer the existence of an invisible force that we cannot taste, touch, or smell to explain all of this.
It's cause and effect.
It's cause and effect, but what is gravity? There are at least 5 different theories of gravity. It's a force, like Newton said. It's the bending of space-time, which is what Einstein said. It is a loop. One of the major theories now is gravitational loop. Superstring theory says that actually gravity is what's primary and gravity creates mass, not the other way around. There are at least 5 different theories of physics. Nobody knows what gravity is. All we know is that pens fall. Now, I want you to think about the following. When you hear something that is unconditionally and unprejudicial, mutually attractive, that connects everything together, that is 100% dependable, mutually attractive force that brings everything together. What does that sound like? Love. It sounds like love. And although the physicists don't teach this typically in Physics 101, Newton actually felt and believed that what he was referring to as the gravitational field, this universal gravitational field, was an expression of God's love for everything. That it was love that held the universe together. Now, isn't that a cool thought? It's really not bad. Other people thought that Newton was off his rocker, as you know, but that's another story. So anyway, that's how I would address that question. Thank you for asking it.
Several months ago, during a television interview that we were doing with you, you mentioned something to do with openness, and I think openness is part of the SAIOE. And you said something like, if you don't open your heart, we'll do it for you. And I wanted you to expound on that a little bit, maybe tell us how we can better open our hearts.
Now, I don't know, did I quite put it that way? That sounds like a threat of surgery. although in the early days in the 90s, when we started doing research with Dean Ornish, and we would teach very, very physically limited heart patients yoga and meditation, and we'd put them on what we called a plant-based diet because we were afraid to use the word vegetarian, and we were afraid to say yoga, so we called it stress management. You know, we had all these code terms going on. And, you know, Rowney and I were running this clandestine program that was called Dr. Guarneri's Cult. And it's true. And had it not been that I was putting stents in simultaneously and making lots of money for the hospital, that they may have just carted us away at that time. But the stents were very important, and since I was able to do that, I wasn't totally crazy. And that's when we would run a support group, and we would call it Open Your Heart. And we would say that there are ways to open your heart other than with stenting and with bypass. And I think one of the important pieces about opening one's heart is to look at what closes our heart. And we can look at that on many, many levels, because we can talk about that powerful, what Gary was just talking about, that powerful energetic center, which in healing touch is called the heart chakra. This great oscillator that's going to be closed by hurt and abandonment, in loss, and criticism, and anger, and fear. And very frequently, when the heart is closed, and when the heart chakra is closed, what we see in the physical is things like heart disease, and lung cancer, and breast cancer, and all of those diseases, if you might, that are sitting in the field of that heart chakra. And this is yet something medicine has to discover. So when we talk about opening the heart, we talk about trusting again. We talk about loving again. We talk about doing our forgiveness work. We talk about cutting the cords to our perceptions that we're not good enough, about forgiving ourselves the things that we may have done that weren't 150%. And Carolyn Mace put it beautifully in one of her pieces where she said, get bitter or get better. Right? So the open heart is one that's not afraid to trust, not afraid to love, not afraid to be compassionate, and I think most importantly, not afraid to be vulnerable. And that is one of the hardest lessons, I think, for all of us. Some of the hardest lessons.
By the way, Mimi's book is The Heart Speaks. Is that correct? The Heart Speaks. I was saying for a while that it was The Heart Knows. We're going to...
Oh, wait a second. Can I just make a comment?
Yes, you can.
No, go ahead. Before you
Just
do
one
this,
thing.
I don't want to lose this, because it hits the moment and then you can end appropriately, because this is not an indie comment. But I was sitting here thinking about two phrases that keep running through my mind, which are titles of songs. And you just said the first one, so that's why I have to interrupt you, because it was a synchronous inspiration moment. And the first lyric is from a Stephen Sondheim musical called Pacific Overtures. And it was a phrase, the heart knows, the thought denies, is there no other way? And the second phrase is a song from Carly Simon that speaks to what you just said, Beamy, which you said, I can see you've had a change in mind, but what you need is a change of heart.
One of the things that Gary talks about in the Living Energy Universe is the folly of reductionistic thinking. Now, I'm paraphrasing, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is that we're taught as little children that everything has to have a common denominator, that everything is explainable, and we try to reduce it to explanation. And that's very interesting because we were just talking about Newton's laws, and Newton, of course, talked about cause and one of the things that Gary talks about in the Living Energy Universe is the folly of reductionistic thinking. Now, I'm paraphrasing, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea is that we're taught as little children that everything has to have a common denominator, that everything is explainable, and we try to reduce it to explanation. And that's very interesting because we were just talking about Newton's laws, and Newton, of course, talked about cause and effect. There can't be an effect unless there's a cause. So what we do is we have this knowing about things, but we can't explain it. So we can't explain it, so we can't explain the cause. And if we can't explain the cause, we discount it, because that's what we're taught to do. What SAIOE teaches you to do is to listen. It's a listening process, get a sense of. Appreciation is a listening process. Being inspired is inspiration. And love comes from the heart. And it comes from the heart, and it's inexhaustible. There is no limit to how much love any of us have. We all have it. So if you ever catch yourself saying, I don't have a love, introduce yourself to yourself. Shake hands with you and say, and try to love you, because that's where it all begins. How about 2 short questions? Genevieve, go ahead.
Okay. Sure. I'm interested in education and things like SAIOE being taught at the school level, where children, of course, can start at an early age learning to listen, learning these techniques that can help improve their life earlier on instead of having to heal broken hearts as they grow, as they are older. So I'd like to know how soon we can start these SAIOE clubs or cults in our schools. And call them the Listeners Club or something with a secret code name, where we can use this but not call it anything too spiritual because that's freaky. And then I'd like to know your opinion on the difference between the new feel-good curriculum, which is dumbing down our kids today so that they can just get passed through the system and feel good about themselves because they've moved forward from grade to grade, versus the pride of accomplishment, which comes through a little bit more hard work. And if SAIOE could help start to balance that curriculum, wouldn't that be a benefit to kids in the long run?
You're into curriculum.
Well, yeah, that's something that I'm really believe in, and I believe that there's an inspirational aspect that can be in teaching, and that if children are allowed to express their feelings and their imagination, and have that incorporated into the learning process, because when we're told to sit still, pay attention, and I'm going to give you a test, that's a different kind. That's not SAIOE learning, and that's not a systemic learning process either, right, Gary? That is not the way it's done. Einstein himself really criticized memory work. When he was challenged with that, they said, well, you talk about memory not being important, but you remember all these complex physics formulas. How do you explain that? And Einstein said, because I use them. And if you can teach, allowing children with their imagination and with their interests to use what you're teaching them, then it's a lifetime of learning. Greg, you had a question.
Yeah, for me, what is it like to hold a person's heart?
Why don't you repeat the question?
So the question is, what is it like to hold a person's heart in your hands? So first I will say, when I was doing angioplasty and stenting, which I stopped doing about 5 years ago, you don't actually hold the heart, but you're actually working on a beating heart. And so you're introducing wires and balloons and devices into a beating heart. However, I have been in the operating room many times during what's called bypass surgery, and have touched and seen the beautiful organ of the heart in all its glory. And it's a powerful force. And the beauty of the heart is we don't have to tell it to beat, right? It just beats. And it beats hundreds of thousands of times. And there's no limit to its beating for all of us right now. So it reminds us of one of the mysteries, one of the miracles. There is no one in medicine, science, physics, I don't care what field you pull today, that can explain the mystery of the human body. The miracle of the loop of Henle in the kidney, the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. And we're only just beginning to discover that what we used to call the beating pump actually has memory and an autonomic nervous system, and the heart is an endocrine organ, and the heart's where we process our emotions. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. And it provides the brain with lots of information about whether we're safe in the world or whether there's a threat to us. It's processing all the time.
When I hear Mimi talk about the universal heart, and someday I'd love to hear her give a real lecture about that, but one of the inspirations that come to me when I hear you use this phrase, we typically think of the heart as a beating organism. An organism now, which it is. But everything is ultimately beating, and beating synchronously, because health comes from the Greek hale, which means whole. And I think about, for example, the beating wings of a butterfly, or just a plain old fly, and the notion of the beating of the brainwaves. It's all rhythm, it's all beating, it's all that whole capacity for unified acting. Okay, it's a pulsating energy. So what we call the physical heart is a special case of heartness, universal beating. And I would love to think, the wisest of plans so grand, that whatever enabled the physical heart to be formed saw it as a special case of heartness, your universal heart idea. And what amazes me, which is what I think amazed Einstein, is we have the capacity to imagine these possibilities. And that to me is a part of, I think, why we should have hope for our species, is that our imagination can lead us to constantly grow beyond what we think is true, and grow into what we're capable of becoming.
Actually, when Einstein was questioned by a news science reporter, they figured they're going to trap him. So they asked him if he believed in miracles. Because after all, a scientific person is not going to believe in miracles. So they feel they would trap him. And Einstein very calmly said, if you don't believe in miracles, there'll be no miracles in your life. We're going to have to get it. We're going to have to get into the. Go ahead.
One final question here, please.
The mic works.
Hey. My question is for all of you, I guess. Does intention and/or visualization play a role in SAIOE?
Yes, well, visualization is imagination. That's all it is, because you are creating something with a vision. So yes, absolutely. And in fact, in many of my SAIOs, and I've actually been criticized when I didn't do it, we do a visualization, a SAIO visualization, where you basically step into your vision. So yes, it's a very important part because it's, again, it's imagination, it's creation, it's the thought. But you follow the thought. You don't just have the thought, you actually turn the thought into a happening. And you do that with a visualization. And then, of course, you become the visualization. And then you can use techniques, SAIO techniques, to become the visualization, getting a sense of it, appreciating it. Okay. So what was the other question?
About intention.
Intention. Okay. Well, you have to, intention is a driving force. It's basically that you intend to do something. And so I would say that inspiration is a very important part of intention. Saying you're going to do something, or even feeling like you're going to do something isn't going to cut it. You need to be inspired. And that's love. As a matter of fact, you ask any great musician or great athlete or great businessman why they're successful, and they always, in one way or another, are going to say, love of the game. Monique, are we done with this? Can we?
Hello? I have a question. Okay, so Robert's always saying that SAIO is a system of thought, but my experience with SAIO is I go into more of a feeling state, which then leads to inspired thoughts, and it seems to go more into a feeling realm for me. So I'm more interested in Mimi because you seem to be much more feeling oriented. When you are looking at these SAIO concepts and structures, do you see these as thoughts or as feelings? And if you could elaborate on that.
I'm going to give this to Mimi, but I will say that that's a better explanation than system. And the reason it's a better explanation is because system is basically almost fear-oriented in the sense that system makes it okay. Feelings is kind of like, gosh, I can't count on that, I can't bank on it. So system was used through thought, and what you're saying is coming from feeling, and that's really what SAIO is.
So I would just add that it is pure intuition for me. It's about coming into a space and getting a sense of it, not, gee, the lights are nice, the ceiling's nice. What does this space feel like to me now? So that's the first. So when I am with one of my patients, for example, they can be chattering about lots of things. And my goal in that is to just get a sense of who they are. And then keep myself open without judgment. This is one of the hardest things, was one of the hardest things for me to learn, because as a physician, you come in thinking you know everything. So now I have to get a sense of what's happening, what I'm hearing, and then be open without judging it. We do this with teenagers all the time. Hey, I got a great idea. I'm going to go and drive the car 50 miles right. No, you're not going to do that. We judge it. We don't even hear the rest of the story. So how do I be open without judgment? And I will tell you, as I have practiced this throughout time, you get information that has never been verbally told to you. And sometimes it's crazy information. Like I'll say things like, you know, maybe your sugar's high because of all those carrots you're eating. And how do you know I eat carrots? And so now I've gotten this little line where I say, my angels told me. Oh. Right? Because I have no real other explanation, because I have this knowing that's coming from a much deeper place that's way beyond the surface conversation.
By the way, coming from a Catholic cardiologist, I think that's totally adorable. Yes, double meaning. Thing I'd like to. Yes, it's really funny. A recovering Catholic cardiologist. Anyway, for me also, because one of the things that's happened is, as I've become a better listener, a non-judgmental listener, I go into a space which is actually for me beyond emotion and beyond thought. It's a state of just pure openness. Pure openness. And often what will happen is, I don't have a term for it. I mean, there's no real word for it, because it's intuition, it's impression, which may then lead to a feeling, which may also then lead to a thought. But I call it like non-sensory awareness. It's a very abstract kind of feeling, and then both feelings and thoughts will begin to emerge, and I will watch them. You know, they're like playing in my consciousness, and then I will, quote, follow them. And of course, I'll be cautious about who I share them with and so on. So I'll then I'll use my feelings and my thoughts to make some judgment about whether I share it or not, and how do I share it. But I totally allow it to just sort of appear. By the way, just in honor of some of our quantum physics type people here who appreciate these kinds of models, you know, in quantum physics, it's really interesting. They talk about what's called a wave and a particle, right? And we say that light, for example, can be a wave distributed in space, or it can be a particle localized in space. And it's very hard to explain one in terms of the other and vice versa. And if you design an experiment to look for light's wave properties, light appears to be a wave. If you design it to look for the particle, light behaves like a particle. It's called the double-slit, single-slit experiment. What's interesting about that is the question about whether everything's like that. That everything is wave-like and particle-like properties. It's not either or. Now, if you hold on to that possible idea, it takes you through many layers till we ultimately get to the notion of feelings and thoughts. And if you think about it, feelings are like fields. Feelings are like waves. We can't localize them in space. They're very hard to describe. And we can pay attention with our double-slit mind to experiencing the waves or the feelings. Thoughts are more particle-like. You know, we can picture them in a particular place. They have a particular location. They're more localized, if you would, as opposed to being, if you would, more distributed or non-local. And we can, if we look for our thoughts, we can experience the thoughts. If we look for the feelings, we can experience the feelings. Most of us have a hard time doing both at the same time, just like it's really hard to see both the wave and the particle-like property of light. And yet, a photon is neither a wave nor a particle. It's just the way that it's expressed in a given context. In fact, one of the ways the physicists tried to deal with it, and I love this concept even though it's no longer in favor, is they referred to it as a wavicle. It's neither a wave or a particle. And I sometimes use the term cogmotion, because it's a mixture of emotion and cognition. And it's just where your focus is. But it's not like they're either or. They're two different sides of a coin, if you would. But where I am in SAIOE, believe it or not, now since you asked the question, and that's more of what I hear when you use the phrase intuition, is I'm in a state even before that. It's a state of pure, non-judgmental, just receiving in an utterly blank, quiet, pure state. And then surprises pop up, and they can have feelings, they can have thoughts. It's really quite a delicious space to be, as I'm sure you've experienced. Now, can we teach children how to do this? No question about it. In fact, they're natural to doing this anyway. It's just that this is knocked out of them. Could we create a program to teach children? Absolutely. I think one of the reasons, I'm going to make a suggestion here, the reason why this gentleman at age 39, he got mad at me when I said he could guess he was 49 because he looks much younger, and he said 39. Okay. The reason why this 39-year-old man had a young child at this particular age is to hopefully inspire him for his child to take this and package it so it can be taught to young children. That's what I hope you do, Bob, just for the record. Yeah. And I think other people will reinforce you in that endeavor.
Intuition is something that the women, the ladies, know a lot about, and they trust it. Men are skeptical about intuition. Not Gary, he's been in the field too long to be skeptical. But Mimi knows what I'm talking about. Because intuition is having a knowing about something and being okay without having an explanation for it. And men tend not to be able to do that so easily. We always want to know why. So we need to start these little boys off and let them know that intuition is okay. All right, we are going to take one single more question. Okay.
Okay, Bob, so one thing that you said that was so beautiful, there was a gap between when you got the diagnosis and when SAIOE actually came to you. And you said there was a period of letting go. There was a moment that you let go, and I was wondering if it was something you actually physically felt in your body, or was it a decision that you made, or was it a thought? What actually transpired in that gap between SAIOE and the diagnosis of that letting go for you?
You know, I can't explain it, but I can tell you what I felt. What I did feel was that it was okay. As soon as I felt that if I was dying, or whatever was going on, as soon as I felt it was okay, and I'm just going to be. And then in the process of being, I got better, and then I went backwards, and I said, what happened? And that's when I realized it was a change of energy. That's all it was. Every aspect of my physical sickness, of my confusion, of my anger, or whatever it was, there was a change of energy. And you know, like Mimi was saying that when she speaks to a patient, she may detect anger, she may detect helplessness, she may detect fear, she may detect these different things, and she recognizes that they're triggers. Well, that's exactly what I realized, was that these, all the upset, all the anger, all the questions, all the fear were triggers to actually create the disease and to actually create my being. So yes, that point, whatever you want to call it, was not only letting go, but being okay with that's just the way it is. And as soon as I went into that's just the way it is state, everything changed. And it was so dramatic and so incredible. And not only that, it helped me, all the work I've done with Epicurean, all the work that I've done, and any creative work I've done became much easier when I just let those processes occur and didn't sit there saying, there's got to be an answer to this. Why doesn't this happen? And that's one of the beauties in science of trial and error, is that when you can do trial and error, you don't have to say this has to happen, that has to happen. You just basically try it, and if it doesn't work, you try something else. And if it doesn't work, try something else, and maybe that's the way it's supposed to be.
Thank you.
Larry Payne.
Please, Evie and Gary, don't go anywhere. You have to run the ladies' room. Okay, all right. So, Lorraine, may I ask you to come up? No, Gary, please don't go anywhere. No, please, no. All right. Yes, okay. So there'll be a break right after this, and so we take these words, love and wings and rabbi and heart and all this. So please stand. Now the Sanskrit word for postures is asana. Technically means seat, but it's basically the word for all the different yoga postures. And I want to ask Gary a question. Have you ever demonstrated a yoga asana before in your life?
Absolutely not.
Good. All right. So, please face each other. Find a partner. And if you don't have a partner, raise your hand and say single. And if you don't find one, we have Billy. And I'm going to ask if he might jump in for us. If you don't, somebody doesn't have a partner. All right, there's Helga. No, there you go. Helga, okay, everybody's got a partner. Okay, so Gary and Lorraine are facing each other, and you get closer, so the hearts get closer. All right, now think of your arms as wings, like the fly wings. And as you inhale, raise your arms up. Leave your arms in the air and bring your hearts a little closer as you exhale. Now raise your arms higher as you inhale, and now bring your arms around each other. It's called Hugasana. Hugasana. Oh my gosh. I think Gary and Lorraine did pretty good on that one. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, have a seat. I'll give you one quick thing more before we take our break. I believe that the future of yoga is going to be with sound. And sound is something that can create love in a minute, in a second. So if you have a seat or if you want to stand, it's your choice. And we're going to use some sound. Now, this is not chanting. Nothing wrong with chanting. But universal sound is something more people will be willing to do. And you'll feel the love in the room. So most people in the world from any dialect can use these words, ah, ma, sa. So I'll be first, and then you'll be the echo. My turn. Ah. Together, deep breath. Ah. How's that make you feel? All right. Let's try another one. My turn first. Together, deep breath. Each time you do one of these, you'll see that you're making your exhale longer. And one of the keys to relaxing is long exhale. And then the sound of the feeling, the heart's getting closer, okay? Now, I want to show you that you can use sound to have these warm, fuzzy feelings. Or you can use sound to make the rabbi rock. So, on the count of 3, we're gonna do the rabbi rock. And I wanted you to tell me the word yes. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yes! Mediocre. I want you to really rock the rabbi. On the count of 3, yes. 1, 2, 3. Yes! Pretty good. But if you want the whole hotel to know that what's happening down here is love, is SAIOE, is heart, is wings, is rabbi. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Yes! Thank you very much. Have a wonderful break. Give yourself a hand.